Hello everyone, if you're new to my channel, consider liking and subscribing. It will make me feel wonderful if you do that. Thanks. By the way, I also have another Naruto and Luffy fanfiction channel. If you are interested, link is in the description.
Though a bird can't fly, that doesn't mean it never will. By Phalanx. What might have been if Kuina had survived her fall down the dojo stairs? She and Zoro strive to become the greatest swordsman in the world, allegiances and promises notwithstanding. Adios.
The citizens of the Whiskey Peak cowered before the menace that loomed before them. Women cried and children bawled as the pirate, resplendent yet menacing in red coat and wearing a straw hat on his head, stood at the bow of the boat looking down at them. Despair, citizens of Whiskey Peak, laughed the man whose sinisterly grinning countenance had decorated the miscellaneous bounty posters. I am Straw Hat Luffy, and your quaint little town is doomed. Ahahoohoohaa. Never, a lone voice rose in defiance. As long as there is one of us who will stand against you, you will never be victorious here. Yeah, we'll take you on, roared another voice. Sail away from here while you can, pirate. The brave men of the town had gathered, and they stood 100 men strong. Surely this was enough to stop the fearsome pirate? Surely it was enough to make that lone pillager back down? Alas, it was not to be. Zoro, said Straw Hat Luffy in a low, ominous tone, come forth. He appeared, like a bladed demon, his dark eyes hidden under an equally dark bandana. The terror of the East Sea, the demon pirate hunter Roronoa Zoro. You know what to do, Captain, this will be a stain upon my honor, protested the swordsman. Zoro, your captain demands obedience, drawled Luffy. I command you. Kill them, all of them. Wordlessly, the ensorcelled swordsman raised his blades, and the screams of terror began. Yes, that was probably how it had happened, Miss Kuina. She had been standing in the ruin of the town of Whiskey Peak. Captain Smoker had sent the Marines to look for more clues to the whereabouts of Straw Hat Luffy while he interviewed the sole survivor of the massacre. Other than the certainty that Straw Hat was the culprit and it had been Zoro that had solely taken on 100 of the townspeople, there hadn't been much else in terms of information. The woman had been in shock, and Dr. San had insisted that they not strain her too much in questioning. So it was down to the old-fashioned way of information gathering. The fact that Zoro had been so directly involved in something like this hurt her. This was not the childhood friend that she knew. The Zoro that she knew would put his sword through his own stomach before he engaged in this kind of indiscriminate slaughter. No, what Zoro did at Shelltown, saving a girl, that was what the Zoro who was as close as a brother to her would do, but not this. It was all that Straw Hat Luffy's fault, she decided. Slowly and surely, the villain was corrupting him. Although, whenever she thought of Zoro taking on 100 armed men by himself and winning, she couldn't help feeling a little envious. 100 men. That annoying Marimo head. Just when she'd thought she'd topped him by slicing up a sea king, he'd gone and one-upped her again. So effing hard to catch up to, that jerk was. Miss Kuina. Kuina started. Piers had been trying to get her attention for the past few minutes. I apologize, Piers-san. I was just thinking about what happened here. I've been thinking too, Miss Kuina. It's odd. What do you mean? Well, your brother, being a swordsman, would have probably left all these slash marks, began Piers. Zoro's not my brother, she said testily. Piers tried to sound sympathetic. I see. I know how hard it can be sometimes when families. I said he's not my brother, Koshiro's daughter. Ichi's apprentice. Then, mistakenly, as Tashiji's sister, and then now, equally mistakenly, as Zoro's sister. Why was it she always had to be likened to someone else, somebody to be anybody? Stop whining and learn to live with the way life works, girl. The voice in her head sounded exactly like Ichi-san. And as usual, the old woman was right, of course. Whining was for spoiled brats. Not a dignified lady of war. I apologize for snapping, Piers-san, Kuina spoke up. But Zoro's really not my brother. Just a close childhood friend, almost like a brother, but we're not related by blood. Hey, guess I kinda got confused on that, Piers replied sheepishly, not the slightest bit offended, it seemed. I just kinda assumed being so good with a sword had to run in the family. Anyway, you were saying something earlier, Piers-san? Huh? Oh yeah, the slashy thingamajig. I mean, some of this damage looks like it could be from /t swords. But the rest of these are really kinda out of place. For example, those houses look more like they've gone kaboom from a bomb. He suddenly grabbed Kuina's arm. And I daren't even guess what made that huge crater you were about to fall in. Cannons, Piers chuckled. Apparently, despite his lessons, her ignorance of marine warcraft was rearing its ugly head again. Not this far inland, Miss Kuina. Not unless they had a really huge cannon, and one that big couldn't have fit in the small ship the Straw Hats have. I'll have to take your word on that, Kuina said, since she personally had no idea what the ship looked like. But in her mind she couldn't help but agree. How curious, Toshigi thought to herself. Dr. San was making a fuss over the woman survivor. This was expected behavior from him, but Toshigi had a niggly feeling that something did not add up. The woman was quite attractive in her own way with her curly brown hair and pleasant countenance. She'd given her name as Yubi Moko. The story she had told had been of a pirate ship sailing into harbor. Fearful of the pirates' retaliation, the peaceful inhabitants had tried to bribe them with food and drink into not destroying the town, but it had not worked. Toshigi frowned. She had no doubt that Roronoa Zoro was more than capable of laying waste to an entire town on a whim. But given that the townspeople had tried to cooperate with Straw Hat Luffy, it seemed odd that he would have destroyed the town so quickly before they had had their fill. Maybe Roronoa and Straw Hat had some disagreement and it had led to a brawl that got out of hand. As quickly as the thought came to her, she dismissed it. That would have been too coincidental, surely. But still, something about this whole business niggled at her. And she kept getting a funny feeling that there was something important about Whiskey Peak that she was forgetting. Smoker's opinion was that while Warrant Officer Briggs was an annoying ass most of the time, it had to be said that when he did get down to it, he could be quite brilliant. I'll bet my pension on it, Briggs was saying, pointing at his sea charts. Those pirates wouldn't have access to an eternal pose, they'll just follow their log pose to the next island. Then the officer grinned. And then that's where we'll catch them, because it's freaking Little Garden. How long does it take for the pose to set on that island? 1 year. Smoker nearly spat out his cigars. 1 year? Everyone has that reaction, Briggs said smugly. But yes, the log pose there takes 365 days to set. If they're lucky we'll catch them while they're waiting. If they are unlucky, well, ever seen a Giganotosaurus? Nasty animal. In fact, that's the one most ignorant idiot's mistake for Tyrannosaurus Rex. Oh, I believe the ones on Little Garden are particularly fond of pirates. As in for eating, he added, as if that obvious bit of trivia needed to be explained. Actually, I have seen. Meta T-Rex, or whatever you want to call it, Smoker replied coolly. Just like everything else, it's only as special as the mind behind it. Right, anyway, as I was saying, we shouldn't even bother with the whole town search thing and just go after the Straw Hats at Little Garden ASAP. The men are out searching the town and Toshigi is questioning the survivor. Smoker grunted. We can recall them, but there's the question of the survivor, we can't just leave her here. We could bring the survivor along with us. Smoker did not look pleased. Something wrong, sir? While I have no doubt that Straw Hat had some part in ravaging Whiskey Peak, something still stinks about this whole thing. Smoker looked a moment. Briggs, what's Whiskey Peak known for again? Whiskey? No, rum. The Marine shook his head as he sniffed the bottle. Bink's extra special gold label. Not much of it left. Looks like someone had quite a party here. The figure hiding the shadows frowned. The Marine with the tanned skin and dark hair, and the other Marine, a pale brunette of a female, were standing in the shell of a building that a few nights ago been the main inn of the town. Like the rest of Whiskey Peak, there wasn't much of it left. He knew that he was well concealed amidst the wreckage and that the 2 Marines who had been assigned to search the area hadn't any idea that he was even there. It wasn't particularly hard to stay that way. The male Marine had kept up a running commentary of the surroundings for his companion's benefit and effectively masked any sound he made. Much to his annoyance, his muscles were cramping from crouching for too long. He flexed a little to relieve them. By sheer bad luck, a rotten and half-burnt floorboard under his feet creaked. It was the slightest of sound, but immediately the female Marine whipped around, trying to place it. It took one to recognize one. Very unassuming, But the stance was a dead giveaway and the figure noted that her hand had flown to the white cane she carried. It was obvious that of the two, the girl was the more dangerous one. The male Marine seemed to notice her movement, because he put down the bottle and immediately asked if everything was all right. "I thought I heard something, Piers-san." In response, male Marine was heading towards his direction as indicated by the girl. The figure stiffened. It would not do to get caught right now. It was unlikely she could pinpoint his location just by that, but all the same, he prepared cashew if its use was necessary. Much to his relief, en route the Marine stepped on another similarly half-burnt floorboard, which produced a similar sound and was accordingly identified by the girl as such. The Marine's attention was thus directed to the immediate area and the objects scattered all over the floor. "Huh. There was the sound of rustling papers. Guess what, Miss Kuina? There's a huge bunch of wanted posters here." He began flipping through the tattered leaves. "It's the newest edition too. Whoa, there's some real crazy bounties on these new faces." He began reeling off names. Captain, the Magician. Red Flag, Dark Doctor, Straw Hat. Say, did you know that Straw Hat Luffy's worth 30 million belly? I didn't know he was worth that much. I mean, the highest bounty I've ever seen in East Blue was Arlong, and honestly that guy was a legendary sunny pirate. I would have thought he was worth much more, but maybe since their captain turned Shisabukai they plea bargained and reduced the bounty on the rest of that crew or something. Perhaps Smoker-san would know. Smoker-san would know that, agreed the Marine enthusiastically. Though I wonder, why would the townspeople here be collecting so many wanted posters? I mean, most of them just stick them on the wall and are done with it. Who else? Began the girl. Well, Marines. The Marine answered before she'd even finished the question. Pirates, 'cause they tend to like bragging about their bounties, and bounty hunters. There was a pause. Piers-san, I've got it. What is it, Miss Kuina? The bounty posters. Great. Just what they needed. And all because those idiots at Whiskey Peak couldn't handle a 30 million berry pirate and their stupid crew. If those two figured the whole thing out, the results would be nasty. He briefly considered taking the two out then and there, until he heard the continuation of their discussion. They must have seen them and thought it was a trap. You're right. The townspeople, it's obvious now why Straw Hat Luffy destroyed the town. They mistook the townspeople for a gang of bounty hunters. Meanwhile, the figure who had been intently eavesdropping on their conversation, face-palmed. The Marine ship left Whiskey Peak, leaving behind the ravaged town for the next island. Captain Smoker, sir, thank you for bringing me along, said Yubimoko, who was seated by the railings of the ship watching the large cactuses that marked the island shrink into the horizon. We couldn't very well have left you there in that ruin, could we, dearie? Dr. San interjected. You'll be safe with us until we get to the next inhabited island. We didn't have the time for a proper investigation, Toshigi lamented. We'll have all the investigation time we need when we catch up to those straw hats, retorted Smoker. But even with a year-long log pose set time, I'm not taking any chances with letting the straw hats get away again. He fingered the jute that was slung over his back, as if in memory of Logatown. You're so dedicated, Captain Smoker, Moko murmured huskily. Toshigi turned her face so no one could see her scowl. It was normal, she supposed, that the woman should show the Marines some gratitude, but that woman seemed to be taking it a step too far. Smoker, however, seemed to not have noticed anything. He was sitting deep in thought still. A Marine trotted up, a sheaf of papers in hand. They've finally gotten it to us, sir. Is that the transfer papers? Toshigi looked interested. And the other thing? Yes, ma'am. General Ripper is very efficient, Smoker extolled as he looked through them. Everything looks in order. He gave the group gathered on deck a wave as he strode off. If you'll excuse me, first have some Marine business to do. Petty officer, Piers had said in astonishment. Smoker had appeared and handed something papery sounding to Piers while he and Kuina were sitting in the communication room. They had taken the opportunity of the long journey to Little Garden to continue her seafaring education. As usual, Piers was drilling more information into her head. Apparently his verbal tendency for information overloading carried over to his imparting of knowledge, and she was desperately trying to take it in a form that would allow her to remember what it was for more than 5 minutes. Today, Piers had been introducing her to the main means of communication used by the Marines, the Den Den Mushi. His explanation of the difference between the different types of the little snail-like creatures had been rather comprehensive. But perhaps his lesson might have been more effective if he didn't punctuate the lesson with intervals of feeding the little invertebrates and giving them little pats on their noodly little heads. Or eye stalks. Or whatever appendages it was that they had on top of their heads. It was at this point when Smoker had shown up with a snarky reprimand about not spoiling the communications equipment rotten by pampering them excessively. Piers had broken off and was halfway through stammering an apology when Smoker had, with some irritation, told the fisherman-turned-marine to relax and not take the remark too seriously. It was also at this point when he had handed over to Piers the aforementioned papery-sounding thing, which had turned out to be a letter of promotion. When we left Logatown, we were forced to sail without sufficient preparation because of the time constraints, Smoker had grunted between puffs of cigar smoke. Amongst those lacking are experienced officers. Tashigi is inexperienced and Briggs is experienced well, he's Briggs. But why me, sir? The young man sounded shocked. You were already a first-class seaman before, so think of this as encouragement, Smoker replied. In our pursuit of dangerous criminals, I will need people I can rely on to think for themselves. And you fit the bill. Petty Officer Piers does have a nice ring to it, Kuina commented encouragingly. She really couldn't understand why Piers was so flustered by the whole thing, until he attempted to turn down the promotion. What was that? I can't hear you, Seaman. Smoker's voice was beginning to sound annoyed. I can't said the Marine in a small voice. I'm not good at fighting. Smoker sounded surprised at this. It says in your record you single-handedly took out 3 vicious pirates in Shelltown. The records were wrong, sir. I didn't. Miss Kuina here did. If she hadn't, I'd have been killed dead, sir. There was an ominous silence. Piers Sand did not attempt to claim the credit. Captain Smoker, Kuina quickly spoke up for her friend. Just that no one believed him when he told them it was me. Well, I didn't exactly make it easy for them to believe it back then. Captain Smoker was silent again. But perhaps because he was a rather remarkable man, he took it all in his stride. Piers was duly told to report to Tashigi for special combat training, because it was too late to change things and he was going to be a petty officer anyway. Kuina was duly told she was in danger of being promoted again, mainly because the discrepancy between her ability and rank didn't reflect too well, and he really didn't like to have to explain why one of the most powerful fighters on the ship was barely anything more than a raw recruit. Even from the distance the cries of the denizens of the savage island could be heard. The more inexperienced Marines shuddered at the sound. There was something undoubtedly primal about dinosaurs that could strike fears into the hearts of men than the probably more dangerous, but also more mudane, sea canes. Smoker's ship was anchored upriver of what was, according to Briggs, the main river of Little Garden. Thanks to the skills of their navigator and helmsman, their modest twin-masted brig had made the journey in record time. Well, if you were to believe the navigator's bragging, that is. Unfortunately, the Straw Hat's ship was nowhere to be seen. Naturally, Smoker had not been pleased. I don't understand this, Briggs wailed in dismay. The Rune's rivermouth should have been the only place that could have been safe for them to port. They should have been stuck here for a year. Maybe the dinosaurs got them? And ate their ship as well? Don't be ridiculous, Tashigi, growled Smoker. The atmosphere in the communications room was gloomy and tense, and not even newly promoted Petty Officer Piers' perpetual sunniness could survive it. So there's only one other possibility, surmised Briggs desperately. Those Straw Hats found some other means of avoiding Little Garden's 1-year log pose setting time. Some kind of advanced log pose that speeds up the setting time that we've never heard of. Could be an eternal pose, sir. There was a pregnant pause. It's most likely, concurred Smoker. But that brings us another problem. How would the Straw Hats have gotten hold of an eternal pose? Looted it from Whiskey Peak? Not likely, sir, came the quiet addition from the corner. Else they wouldn't bother with Little Garden and just sail straight to the wherever the post pointed to from Whiskey Peak. There was another period of tense silence. Tashigi opened a port window, because the cabin was getting so full of smoke that hardly anyone save Smoker could breathe. Even the Den Mushis were emitting little coughing sounds in their sleep. Finally, Smoker spoke again. Which means they probably got the eternal pose from here. He gave a sigh. We have no choice then. Tashigi, get the men ready and we'll comb the island for clues. Yes, sir. The warrant officer jumped to her feet. The matter that now remained was process of obtaining a lead to the pirates themselves, which was easier said than done. Despite its name, Little Garden was neither little, nor could it be by any stretch of imagination be called a garden, with Briggs warning that the terrain was extremely hostile and they would have to make sure that the squads sent out to search the island did not end up Dino Chow. As such, it was decided after a brief conference that each search party be led by an officer. Piers, being the most junior officer present, was given the task of guarding the ship. Due to his affinity with the Den Den Mushi, he had also been given the additional role of communications officer and manning the array of telepathic invertebrates. He'd also been given the task of monitoring any Den Den Mushi communications in the area, courtesy of the black wiretap Den Den Mushi which he now had on his wrist. Kuina's disability meant she wouldn't be much use in a search party, so she'd been tasked with staying on the ship as well. As just a common seaman, it wasn't in her place to object, as much as she wanted to find Zoro herself. And so, the search parties were divided into three main parties: Tashigi plus platoon of Marines, Briggs plus platoon of Marines, Smoker and Smoker alone. Armed with map and directions for coverage area, set forth into the deep jungle, leaving behind a skeleton crew consisting of a rescued survivor, a cook, a doctor and 2 Marines on board. In the cargo hold of Marine ship, the figure crept cautiously out of the crate from which said figure had concealed self in. Uncomfortable, but necessary, clucked the stowaway. Given what happened to the other frontier agents, we'd better not mess this up or the unluckies will get us. The Marines should never have poked their noses into Baroque works business. I guess we'll just have to take care of this ourselves, won't we? Said the sultry voice from the doorway of the now unlocked cargo hold. Especially now that Devil Fruit user Marine is off the boat, and so are most of his men. Perfect timing, M's Thursday. I would say so too. Yubi Moko's lips pursed into a smile, Mr. 11. It had been a good hour since the search team departed. Piers was currently perched on the stool in the communications room, diligently giving the Den Dens a gentle misting of fresh water from a spritzer, which the little snails seemed to be enjoying. Scientists have fiercely debated on whether the Den Den Mushis, like their garden variety cousins, do not like salt. There have also been multiple dissertations written on whether they, in the salt-heavy environment, would benefit from fresh water baths once in a while. What is clear, however, is that the Den Dens enjoy moisture, and the bottom line is that a misting is generally appreciated by the Den Den. A lesser-known fact about them is that they do like beer, but like their garden variety cousins, don't tend to do well in holding in their liquor. So far, the communications monitoring hadn't been eventful. The black wiretap Den Den simply stayed asleep and dormant. Out of boredom than anything, Piers gave the black Den Den Mushi a little poke. Hey now, little guy, don't think there's anything much to be tapping into way out here. But if there's anything, you know. The black snail opened one eye and regarded the human which had interrupted its nap. It then promptly closed its eye and went back into a half-sleep again. It doesn't have to be right something you heard right now, you know, muttered the Marine, misting his wrist and the black Den Den in the process. Even anything you heard earlier today before I started watching you would be good. One eye opened and regarded the Marine again. Yes, I would really like to know. Really, insisted the Den Den keeper. The black wiretap snail suddenly stopped sleeping and began to recite what seemed to be a rather out-of-place conversation. Cafe? Can I take your order? Piers was astounded. You mean you heard this before we even got to the island? Just how long distance is your eavesdropping range anyway? Asterisk. The telepathic snail ignored him and continued relaying the conversation, which despite the signal interference from the ship having been in the middle of the ocean during the time it had been tapped, was decidedly getting more and more interesting. In response, the petty officer sat up straight and began listening intently to the conversation. Mr. Zero? Muttered the Shelltown native to himself. I need to tell Captain Smoker. He was so absorbed in listening he almost didn't notice the shadow which filled the open orchard. The startled Marine whirled around. In the doorway stood a man dressed in a black coat and a purple frilly shirt and with something that was either leaves or feathers tucked into the band of his top hat. However, the most arresting feature about him at the moment was the long, naked katana in his hand. The same sword now pointed menacingly in his direction. Piers swore. The petty officer's own weapons had been left in the corner by the doorway. "Yes, very unfortunate indeed," said the intruder, smiling sinisterly. "Now that you've heard that name, it looks like I'm going to have to kill you, boy." Several minutes ago. Lunch, Piers-san. Kuina set down the tray of food next to her friend. "Cook-san made his seafood special today." "Sheesh, that Mr. Cook. He's still getting you to deliver food to the officers?" Piers looked slightly disapproving on her behalf. Kuina grinned. "I think he keeps forgetting I got promoted out of Zatsuyo rank." She shrugged. "Besides, since I'm not doing much other than patrol the ship, it's the least I can do to help now that no one else is around. I mean, Dr. San is with that girl Moko. Cook-san's doing inventory on the stores and you've got work here." After Pierre's effusive thanks, she carried on. "Anyways, I should be taking some food for Dr. San now, so do your best, Piers-san. Don't work too hard, Miss Kuina." The blind girl left the communications room and made her way to the sick bay. Over the course of the weeks she had become familiar with the ship and no longer stumbled around lost. "Dr. San," she called out cheerily as she entered the medical office. Cook-san made his. Her words stopped mid-sentence. A voice in her head was telling her something that her remaining senses had detected. Something is wrong. She knew, instinctively, by how the room lacked presence, that something had happened to Dr. San. The old doctor almost never left the sick bay unless someone was hurt. In fact, he rarely even took meals with the crew and preferred to stay in his office and quarters. She'd gotten so accustomed to this that it was incomprehensible that she should enter the sick bay and not have the doctor's cheery greeting of, "Oh, to what do I owe this pleasure, Kuina girl?" The rapping of something against the door. And a muffled voice, slightly familiar. Opening the door of the closet resulted in a trussed-up doctor tumbling out. "It was Moko," said the doctor, once she had set him free. "Hit me over the head while I wasn't looking, and when I woke up I was in that closet there." "Did there seem to be any reason for her to attack you?" "Not that I could imagine," Dr. San said, rubbing his head gingerly. "There was the sounds of a drawer being pulled and its contents being searched through. As I thought, she took it." "Took what, Dr. San?" "My service revolver. Old school officer issue 6-shooter, a solid piece of work too." 6 shots. Kuina muttered. "Dr. San, stay here, I'll be right back." She gripped Koyajaku, encased in the white cane that served as its sheet. He knew what she had in mind, because as she exited the room, she could hear him call after her. "Be careful, Kuina-kun." Mr. 11 always fancied himself as a swordsman of great repute. Moreover, he fancied himself as a highly efficient frontier agent who got the job done. Sure, the number 11 implied that he wasn't as good as some of those idiots back in Whiskey Peak who got themselves slaughtered, but the numbers were a mere technicality anyway. He totally wasn't being a coward by hiding when those 2 crazy pirates had wreaked havoc on the town. Nope, he definitely wasn't hiding when Mr. 5 and Miss Valentine had come to administer punishment either. Not at all. He was being smart. Tactical, as they called it, waiting for the right moment to strike and redeem the pride of the frontier agents. With Miss Thursday as his trusty sidekick, of course. The situation as it was complicated. The mission required recovering the princess in hiding alive. At least, until they'd extracted from her how much she knew about the inner workings of Baroque works and how much of that information had been relayed to outsiders. The problem was that she had gone running off with the same bunch of dangerous pirates who had wrecked the town. And Mr. 11 wasn't sure he wanted to tangle with them head-on just yet. And then there was the added complication of the Marines chasing after the said pirates. If the Marines, especially that dangerous devil fruit captain, were to get hold of the princess, out would come the whole story and Baroque works would be exposed. He shuddered to think if that were to happen. Based on Miss Thursday's information as a spy aboard the ship, the smoking bastard didn't seem to be the type that could be bought off. Which made things very difficult, and left them thus with only one recourse. Either aid the Straw Hats in escaping and then recapture them before the Marines did, or make sure the Marines never left Little Garden. The latter would also give themselves a little bit more breathing space to arrange a welcoming committee for the princess when she finally got to her home country, which was, after all, where she was undoubtedly headed to. At the present, the little communication he'd managed to have with his boss was to take care of the Marines and let the officer agents handle the Straw Hats. Other than the smoking captain, this could probably be easily done. However, he'd prefer to avoid a confrontation with the devil fruit user, which meant that his stealing the marine ship and leaving the crew to starve and die on Little Garden was a genius of an idea. 4 crew on board. This should be a cakewalk. Miss Thursday would take care of the doctor and the cook, and he could handle the 2 marines. Especially this one, he thought in contempt as the unarmed marine, the same chatty one from earlier and now scared into silence, tried to back away from his approaching blade. Hopefully the girl would be more of a challenge when the time came. If he read her right, she was a swordsman. It would be interesting to see if she were a real one or just a poser who thought waving around a sword made her dangerous. Wham! Mr. 11's internal monologue was rudely interrupted by a tray of seafood to the face, followed by the impact of the aforementioned tray the seafood had been on, once again, to his face. "Why you?" he growled, wiping food out of his eyes and sending squid flying. The indignity being hit by an impromptu weapon of a food tray. He was going to cut that bastard in half for that. Except that he couldn't find him. Too late he realized that the marine had taken the opportunity to slide past between his legs and was already on his feet and reaching for his weapons near the doorway. The gun was the first weapon he'd gone for, but his sword Kashu's razor-sharp blade neatly sliced the barrel off just as the marine brought it up. He really loved doing that. The priceless look of shock on the Marines' faces when they realized that their guns were doing no good was worth taking a moment to gloat over. "Now why don't you pick up that cutlass and try using that instead?" Mr. 11 taunted, regaining his cockiness. "You might last longer." Any Marine, on hearing that, would have done so, and come rushing at him stupidly to get cut up for his pains. So went Mr. 11's prior experiences. And so accordingly he was surprised when this Marine, instead of reaching for the sword, instead showed a clean pair of heels and darted out of the door without any hesitation. To add insult to injury, the door was slammed shut just as he, Mr. 11, tried to go after the fleet-footed fugitive, and the flashy fencer found his furious fusillade of insults phased by a forceful application of door to face. After another stunned moment, he got back up to his feet, rubbed his sore nose where he'd smacked himself against the wood, and flung the offending door open. You, he was screaming with rage, "Don't make me come over there." Piers was running for his life. Somewhere at Tay had the feeling that he should have stood his ground against the intruder, but common sense dictated the information he had obtained through the Black Den Mushi was more important, and to be able to get that information to Captain Smoker required staying alive. The former fisherman had a realistic assessment about his own combat capabilities, and he could tell that he had no chance against the swordsman. Not even with a sword. No, the only person who was capable of facing him right now was Kuina. But where was she? He rounded a corner and pulled up. In front of him was Yubi Moko, the woman survivor from Whiskey Peak. "Miss Moko," the Marine warned, distressed. "You need to get away from here, there's a dangerous man on board the ship." At this point he stopped short, because he was looking down the barrel of a revolver. The woman smiled. Realization dawned on the petty officer's face. You're about time you figured that out," drawled she as Mr. 11 appeared, puffing slightly in his hot pursuit. "Mr. 11, is this the last one?" The pursuer colored. Not quite, Miss Thursday, there's still the other one left, the girl." "Oh, sighed Miss Moko, or rather, Miss Thursday. "Can you for once not have to depend on me carrying the team? Never mind. Take care of this one. I'll handle the galley wench." "You leave Miss Kuina alone." Piers glared at the woman despite being held at gunpoint. "But if you try anything she'll make mincemeat out of you anyways." He was promptly told to shut up by the way of a sword being held against his neck. "If you don't want your little subordinates to die, I suggest you do what I say," said Mr. 11 inches smugly. "You're going to be hoisting that anchor there and moving your boat." "I'm doing no such thing," declared Piers defiantly. "You're going to kill us all anyway." There was a pause. "How did you know that?" demanded Mr. 11. "Did you read my mind?" "You sorta just told me that earlier," Piers pointed out logically. There was another pause, in which one could hear the wind blowing. "You're an idiot," said Miss Thursday sharply to Mr. 11, before stalking off. "But if he won't move the ship, guess we'll move on to plan B. Get rid of him and move the boat yourself. I'll go look for the girl." "What are you planning to do with this ship?" Piers demanded. Mr. 11 smirked ominously as the departing figure of Miss Thursday disappeared from sight. "Oh, I wouldn't be worrying about the ship if I were you." Miss Thursday considered herself an extremely competent woman who had had the misfortune to be coupled with a totally incompetent partner. If she had been male, she probably would have been an officer agent. That was her opinion at least. But no, she had to be partnered with that piece of faff that was Mr. 11, when she should have been at least paired with Mr. 1 or even Mr. 0. The mental image of calling herself Miss All Sunday briefly filled her head. Such power. It was a nice thing to daydream about. The only warning she had of the sword-bearing woman who was about to take off her hair, or perhaps her head, was the shadow that had intruded into the corner of her eye. Even as she spun around, she knew the girl was fast. Damn that Mr. 11. He should have warned her about that, but she was almost sure that she was faster. There was no time to gaze down the sights of the long-barreled revolver and aim. That female Marine was too close. In the split second before the flashing blade came down, she squeezed the trigger. The gun fired. And she doesn't give me any respect. Mr. 11 was pouring out his frustrations to his captive. "I mean, it's so hard to be a master of the sword, you know? With all the newfangled guns nowadays. Any stupid pirate can go about pretending they can fight without any kind of real discipline." "But isn't your partner's skill set marksmanship?" Piers asked. The incongruous scene of executioner and the to-be-executed discussing the merits of swords versus guns had been started by the petty officer's sympathetic remark of how Miss Thursday must have been a difficult woman to deal with. Mr. 11 had enthusiastically agreed, and in the ensuing conversation, had deferred the impending beheading. Marksman's schmarksman. Dismissed the swordsman. It's all point and shoot, point and shoot. Compared to killing with a blade, where's the skill in that? Well, can't disagree with that. I've always found the cutlass harder to use than the rifle. My point exactly, exulted Mr. 11. Say, you're a really good listener. It's kind of a shame to kill you. The loud sound of a gunshot interrupted them. Kuina, Piers half stood up in alarm. Well, that's that, Mr. 11 said philosophically. Looks like that harpy Miss Thursday's done her job, so I've got to off you now. The sword, whose name Mr. 11 had earlier confided to Piers was Cashew, was raised and ready to fall. Nothing personal, I hope you understand. Actually, it is. The voice that interrupted them was familiar, and under the circumstances, extremely welcome. Just what the hell do you think you are trying to do to my subordinate? The ship's doctor recognized the sound. It was his own gun's report. As an old man who had sailed the Grand Line, he had developed an uncanny knack for recognizing when a life had passed on, even when he was not exactly physically present. He prayed that in this case, the life that had been taken had not met its end at the end of his stolen weapon. Mr. 11 was paling visibly, the loss of color probably accentuated by the sight of the row of Marines behind the Marine officer who had appeared on deck. Warrant Officer Briggs. Good thing I remembered what was it about something that Captain Smoker said that's been bothering me. What was Whiskey Peak known for, he was asking. The Marine officer's rifle was leveled at the swordsman. The other Marines followed suit. So what's Whiskey Peak known for? A trivial bit of trivia. It has one of the highest bounty head claim rates in the Grand Line. And why is that? Because it is a town that consists of nothing but bounty hunters, another voice chimed in. Toshigi, the other warrant officer, had shown up with her team as well. I just remembered that fact halfway through the jungle too. Then I realized that the woman survivor couldn't have been telling the entire truth about what happened in Whiskey Peak, and hurried back here. Cripes, did you have to come to steal my thunder? Briggs whined. Toshigi ignored her fellow officer. I'm glad for once your conversational skills saved your life, Piers. Then to the rest of the Marines. All of you stand back, he's mine. Oh no you don't, Toshigi, I got here first, Briggs protested hotly. He's a swordsman, I'll handle him. Oh my god, is that the Maitu Cashew? I have him at gunpoint already, one of the Ryo Wazamono. There was a thunk. Both squabbling officers turned to see Mr. 11, who had been distracted by the two new arrivals, now lying in a crumpled heap on the deck. What? Petty Officer Piers said in response to their combined looks of astonishment, rubbing his knuckles where they had made contact with Mr. 11's glass jaw. First I'm a Marine after all, you know. The old doctor used his surgical mirror to peer around the corner, checking that the coast was clear before proceeding into the room. Kuina girl. She was kneeling composedly in the middle of room, her uniform stained with red. My girl. The doctor said slowly, are you all right? Yes, the blind girl replied. And no, it seemed a little fanciful, but despite the fact that he knew her eyes were sightless, they seemed to be trained on the corpse of the woman she had killed. Did the bullet hit you? It missed me. Barely. She was trying hard to keep her voice controlled, but he could hear her dazedness. I'm sorry, Dr. San. I had no choice but to kill her. Laws, Kuina girl, the old doctor snorted, in partial relief. A doctor I may be, but I'm not such an idealistic fool that I'd think lowly of you for, Dr. San. The swordswoman explained. I tried to take her out before she could shoot. I tried, but something I did gave me away before I got to her and she got your gun up. The doctor gingerly reclaimed his purloined pistol. And got a shot off. He knew this was true, but still he checked the chamber, and true enough, there was one empty casing. It was still warm. It missed me, but not through any doing of my own. Her voice echoed the awe with which her brush with death had left her. I was saved by luck. Just pure luck. Never bring a sword to a gunfight, the doctor shrugged philosophically. Yet you survived and won. That's good, right? No, Kuina shook her head. It is not good enough. I need to become stronger. There must be a way for the sword to overcome the gun. She stood up, shook the blood off her shikomizu, and made her way to the door, her face determined. I will never depend on luck to survive again. I'm sorry, I should have done a better job at protecting the boat, sir. Smoker took a deep puff of his cigar. It's my fault as well. I should have known better than to leave only 2 of you guarding the ship when we had unverified passengers on board. The captain had been having a word with Piers on the upper deck about the happenings at Runes, which had been the first thing Piers had reported to the captain on his return from Little Garden. But given the circumstances, you didn't do too badly. Smoker jerked a thumb at Mr. 11, who had been tied to the mast. The prisoner had been a surprisingly tight-lipped source of information. It seemed clear that whoever pulled his strings, it was not the recently deceased Miss Thursday, and it was someone he feared more than Captain Smoker. Although that didn't stop the cunning captain from extracting more information from him via trickery and bluff. Did Toshigi hear of this communication you intercepted yet? Not quite, sir. Briggs has heard, which is why he knows which way we ought to be heading, but Miss Toshigi was a little enthusiastic about that sword of Mr. 11's that she retired to her quarters with it, so she missed it. Typical katana freak. Grumbled Smoker. Toshigi. Oitashigi. It was a miracle that the cigar did not go flying, given the volume of the captain's hollering. It was an even bigger miracle that the warrant officer had not even heard it, or at least did not seem to have given the lack of response. It took some stronger hollering before the bespectacled girl came running out of the cabin, waving around, much to both men's alarm, the unsheathed sword. After Toshigi had finished tripping on and over, and almost gotten impaled by her new acquisition, Piers had replayed the vital piece of information the Black Den Mushi had intercepted. In the ensuing discussion, there was much talk of secret organizations, coup d'etats, and missing princesses, but their original course of action taken was found to be justified. Alabasta Smoker smiled slightly as Piers scuttled off to get Briggs an eternal pose. The petty officer did owe the navigator one after all. Let's take a little trip. Everything was the sand, and the sand was everything. He stood upon the tallest spire of the city, watching the little leaf-headed pirates below, scurrying around like leafcutter ants raiding the nest of the other rival ants. Oddly appropriate analogy, for all the significance those little men had. From his vantage point he could tell that the royal guard were still too far away. The inconvenient sandstorm that had sprung up between palace and port town ensured that the swiftest of them all, the bird warrior, would not be able to make use of the skies. It would be a good 20 minutes before the camels could get them hence. The Shichibukai smiled. Just as planned. All pawns and sacrificial pieces being played in a game they didn't even know they were in, while he sagely waited for the right moment. In amusement he watched the citizens of the Nanoa cower, unaware of their impending doom, as he, the pirate, stood at the bow of the boat looking down at them. As long as she did, and so would he. The lonely king waited upon the throne, a sea of calm amidst the turmoil that was threatening to engulf the desert kingdom and overrun it. Lesser men than he would have fled perhaps, with those loyal to him and all the treasures of the city. But not this king. This king did all he could to hold things together as he waited for the return of his greatest treasure, his future, and his only child. Vivi. She'd left in search of an answer. She had had faith that she'd be able to find it. And as long as she had faith, so would he, several days ago. As much as she liked Officer Piers, Toshigi had to admit that he was utterly hopeless at combat. In practice he appeared to do all right. But the moment it came to a real duel, he performed like kuina in the water. His moves became uncoordinated, his aim embarrassingly off, his mind frozen on what to do. It couldn't be cowardice, Toshigi decided. On their adventures on the Grand Line, he seemed to do pretty well against most dangers. Indeed, that man would jump into a sea king-filled ocean without hesitating if someone fell overboard. No, it was something else, and it was driving Toshigi nuts trying to figure out what it was. It didn't help that that girl would often come and watch the training sessions. Well, listen to the training sessions. Or whatever sense it was that she used to get around. Toshigi was always on edge whenever Kuina was around. It wasn't that she actively disliked the girl, but her very presence acted as a reminder of Rorinoa's harsh words. No one likes being compared to another person. And to add insult to injury, this was inevitable because the both of them looked so much alike. No, 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 Toshigi groaned in consternation as Piers executed another half-hearted attack. The Marine hung his head dejectedly. Since his promotion he had augmented his standard Marine uniform with a padded navy blue vest that Kuina had sewn for him. Toshigi had heard that Kuina had threatened to throw Piers overboard for attempting to pay her for rendering the service. Perhaps the vest was an attempt to make himself look more imposing. Toshigi had to admit he needed it, because the otherwise unremarkable-looking Marine with the perpetual wide grin was the most unthreatening-looking person she had ever seen. He didn't look capable of cutting down a pirate in cold blood, or anyone for that matter. If I didn't know any better, I'd have said that you were aiming to miss, she snapped as the Marine fumbled and nearly dropped his cutlass. Suddenly, she realized that the officer in training had never ever managed to score a hit on her in a duel for a reason, and she had inadvertently said it out loud. You aren't, are you? She followed up slowly, glaring at her student. The thing about Piers was that he was incredibly easy to read. His ears immediately turned red. You've been holding back on me all this while? Toshigi confronted him, furious. Is it because I'm your superior officer? No ma'am, stammered the miserable officer in training. It's not anything like that. Then what is it? Why can't you fight me seriously? Toshigi gritted her teeth. She couldn't help thinking that once again her gender had come into play. Don't tell me you're one of those types who can't hit a woman. No sir, ma'am, sir. This triggered a response from the onlooker. I don't think that's Piers-san's problem, Toshigi-san. Toshigi whirled around and glared at Kuina. Fine, why don't you fight him instead, seaman? I'm not sure if it's a good idea. You're supposed to be some great swordsman, aren't you? Toshigi gritted her teeth. Well, let's all see firsthand what's so special about you. I said fight, Toshigi snapped. All right, Kuina conceded and picked up one of the practice shinai. Piers-san, please use this instead. Piers swapped his cutlass for the wooden practice sword and began the duel. Toshigi's eyes widened. It was as though a different person was fighting. Piers was no longer hesitating in his movements, and was even counter-attacking even though not one of the attacks was actually successful. Eventually he still lost, but it was an actually passable effort. Your problem was the weapon? Well, it's like fine with a wooden practice sword or blanks. Piers tried to explain after the match ended, embarrassed. But when it's a real sharp sword and live bullets, you could instantly kill someone without trying at all, you know. That, Toshigi tried to emphasize, is the point, Piers. Our opponents will be bloodthirsty pirates who are busy terrorizing innocent people. We cannot afford to hold back. Piers looked ashamed. I know. I thought I could do it if I really had to, but like I found out in Shelltown, I've just got a block, and even if they are evil pirates, they are still people. And he trailed off miserably. I'm not much good at fighting. He repeated at last. For the 100th time, it seemed. It was at that moment that Toshigi realized, much to her consternation, that the man was a closet pacifist. Or something similar in nature. She resisted the urge to groan. Yes, the problem here was that man was just too plain nice to be a good fighter because he was scared of actually killing someone. What was she supposed to do with him? Then maybe you should try something that suits you better. Toshigi jumped as Smoker materialized from seemingly nowhere. Smoker Captain sir, stammered Piers again. If you've got problems with using weapons, petty officer, how about using your fists? Fists, sir? Smoker towered over the three of them, the lazy wisps of smoke that curled around his demeanor giving him an aura of menace. Fists, petty officer Piers. Those things at the end of your arms. The Marine captain extracted the stub of his cigar from his mouth, lit a new one with the end of the old, and exhaled. Punch me. Sir, I said punch me, roared the captain, and if you hold back, I'll make sure a keelhauling's included as part of your officership initiation. Captain Smoker, objected Toshigi, horrified. Come on, show me some of what you did in runes. Her protest was cut short by the thud of tanned knuckles against pale chin. Smoker staggered back, holding his jaw. His newly lit cigar clattered onto the deck. Petty Officer Piers was standing, his arm extended, his stunned face totally at odds with his stance. The superior officer grinned. Now that's what I'm talking about. Sparring time, let's go. Oh she, slipped the young Marine before he caught himself. Sorry Miss Kuina. Ow. Smoker had planted his fist in and sent the officer in training flying backwards. Keep focused, reminded Smoker. Don't worry, I won't be using my devil fruit power. Toshigi's sweat dropped. Her normally serious captain was enjoying himself a bit too much. The terrified petty officer was currently desperately dodging the captain's blows. At least he was actually trying to fight back. Not that he had a choice. I didn't know officership training was this complicated, commented Kuina flatly. Under Captain Smoker. You don't want to know even half of what I went through. Toshigi replied glumly as Piers was sent flying across the deck for the second time. Skills? Queried the officer. Smoker had foisted her off on with vague instructions to find her a role on the crew. The sour man, who sounded harassed enough, seemed even more displeased. But he proceeded to process her anyway. Swordsmanship. And kimono making. He gave a snort, and she could hear some scribbling of pen on paper. Ship's tailor, then, he grunted. At least we'll have an easier time of it with the uniforms. You can sew uniforms, right? I've never tried, but… Well, what can you make then? Kimonos? Besides kimonos? Yukatas. There was a silence where the officer tried to figure out if she had been joking. Can you sew anything that isn't a kimono? Well, There was a pause. No sorry, Shellushed. Never mind, snapped the officer before turning back to his navigation charts. Zatsuyo it is, then. Kuina sat in the corner, sadly holding at the remains of the vest she'd sewn for Piers. The delicate and almost invisible stitches, meant for fine clothing, had proved impractical for that specimen of combat gear, and had fallen apart embarrassingly quickly. Granted, the pounding Smoker had been dishing out had been really something, but still. The doctor had not been amused. Do you think that I've nothing to do but to patch up stupid Marines day in and day out? He grumbled. His prodding of his patient's battered physique was punctuated by said patient's little exclamations of pain. Laws. It's not as if, ow, trying to make sure that you foolish, ouch, lot don't go down with scurvy and dysentery isn't, ow, work enough? It's okay doctor, really. Well, Captain Smoker said. Youch? I mean he was saying that everyone starts off, ouch, weak in the beginning, but it's best to build yourself up combat-wise and not depend on special powers, so that if something happens, doctor, that really hurts. You aren't useless without your devil fruit powers. Which you don't have, you young fool. Laws, since when did that idiot Smoker start taking a leaf out of Vice Admiral Garp's books? Kuina didn't know who Garp was, but if he was anything like Smoker, she really couldn't imagine how much crazier his training could have been. She sighed. She was going to have to go over the vest again. Possibly with stronger and thicker thread this time. Right at his moment, the doors to the sick bay opened, and she knew from the scent of smoke, Captain Smoker had entered. Oh come on, Francis. For a moment Kuina wondered who this was meant to address, but then realized with a jolt that Dr. San obviously had a name beyond his title. You know well enough that my little trainings don't hold a candle to Garb's. Little trainings? 2 broken ribs, smoker. 2 broken ribs, and the boy had just barely finished recovering from a previous injury. Doctor, sir, I'm not. Piers attempted to protest at being made to sound like a fragile invalid. You, patient. You, shut up. So just sit still or I'll tape your mouth shut. Aren't you overreacting a little, Francis? Smoker interjected mildly as Piers cowered before the doctor's onslaught. Laws, Smoker. Unlike some of the other freaks currently on this boat, the boy does not have a devil fruit ability, growled the doctor, ignoring his patient, who cringed in tandem with the captain. You overpowered monsters need to learn not everyone is capable of inhuman feats. We're in the Grand Line now, Francis. You of all people should know we can't afford to hold back, because this ocean is overrun with monsters like us. One thing I never missed about the Grand Line, Dr. San conceded, but he stopped yelling at Smoker after that. Captain Smoker was rummaging in his jacket for something during the yelled conversation. She knew from the squeaking sound it was made of leather, with metal studs. Knuckle duster gloves, the old doctor noted, still grumbling. Where'd you get those? Scored them off Briggs. They were supposed to be a promotion gift for some knucklehead lieutenant friend of his back in East Blue. Said he wouldn't need them anymore since the fool got himself demoted to seaman over some guy in a dancing contest. Asterisk. That Briggs still has friends. Kuina wondered if the conversation sounded as bizarre to everyone else as it did to her. Anyway, since our new petty officer here can throw a pretty mean punch, figured he could use them. With that he casually tossed the gloves to Piers, who was struck speechless with awe and didn't manage to thank Smoker before the captain made his wordless exit. When he finally regained control over his powers of speech, you could practically hear the air sparkle. Kuina could hear the squeak of leather as he tried them on. They must have been a snug fit, or so cool. The black gloves will go very well with navy blue, Piers San. There was a stunned pause. Kuina girl, how could you have possibly known they were black? She smiled enigmatically. It's a trade secret, Dr. San. What color and weave is this one? Ichi-san asked, holding up a swath of cloth. Kuina took several deep breaths before deciding on an answer. Purple muslin. Clothes. It is pink. This one? Yellow silk. You're completely off. It is black, and it is not silk, it is satin. Isn't satin technically silk? Mumbled Kuina to herself. Kimono maker and apprentice were standing in the drying yard where yards and yards of freshly dyed fabric, mostly silk and muslin, were flapping in the wind as they dried. Kuina always liked standing out here on a windy day. The sound of the flapping cloth made it easy to imagine she was traveling on a ship en route to catching up with Zoro and becoming the greatest swordsman in the world. No, blue silk brocade. With silver threading. Ichi-san was exasperated at her lack of progress. It had become part of her training that she spent every afternoon standing out in the hot drying yard trying to identify the fabrics that were hung out on the poles without touching them. How exactly she was supposed to do this was unclear. But Ichi-san insisted it was doable. And when Ichi-san insisted it was doable, it was, or else. Gray embossed silk. Finally, breathed Ichi-san in some sort of shrewish relief. You aren't hopeless after all. And then she picked up another length of cloth, and this one? Kuina groaned. Ship ahoy! The lookout yelled. Another one, Toshigi observed from the bridge. We must be getting close to Alabasta. No question about it, we are, Briggs replied pointedly, sounding a little insulted. The navigator pulled out a spyglass and gazed intently though it, fidgeting all the while. Another half day and we'll make it to Nanoa, wind conditions prevailing. And they will. Dry wind around these parts always blows from southwest to northeast this time of the year. How would you know that? Toshigi asked her fellow warrant officer. It's not the first time I've sailed this part of the Grand Line. Briggs replied rather condescendingly, still rocking to and fro as he peered through his spyglass. Unlike you sheltered greenhorns of the East Blue, I actually used to be based in Marine HQ, I'll have you know. Toshigi frowned. Wait, if you used to be stationed at HQ, how did you even end up in East Blue? The question you should be asking, Toshigi, Isu, did Briggs piss off enough to get him sent to the backwater streets of Logatown and put under my troublesome command? You almost could see Briggs' face turn a shade paler at hearing Smoker's interjection. But the presence of the captain was quite effective. Briggs promptly shut up and continued peering through the spyglass as though it was the most interesting thing in the world. Toshigi could have sworn she heard a stifled laugh coming from the helmsman. Smoker was trotting out his plans for searching for Straw Hat the moment they set foot on Nanoa when a harumphing sound from Briggs attracted their attention again. What is it now, Briggs? Captain Smoker sounded irritated this time. It's strange. It's been a few years, but I don't recall there being that many ships of the same company in this area. What company? Briggs put the spyglass down and pointed at a fleet of large galleons, all seemingly headed in the same direction as they were. On the large white sails of the ships, a purple and white insignia could be seen. They must be recent. I don't think I've heard of that company very much less what they do. Toshigi was squinting and trying to get a better look at the insignia. She hadn't the spyglass, so it was harder going for her. "Baroque works," she read out. "I wonder what they do." If Kuina had to describe the Alabastan port town of Nanoa with a single word, it would have been smelly. It was not exactly a do not be denied that walking in the streets of Nanoa meant smelling a lot of things, such as roasting meat, onions and spice, perfume, sweat and the salt of the sand and the sea. "I'm positively melting," she confided to Piers, whom she was annoyed to notice that, being a true-born shore dweller, was comfortably adapted to the heat and scorching sun. Kuina, on the other hand, who had grown up in the softer climate of the more inland village, did not fare as well. The Marines had been issued a loose linen cover in addition to their normal uniform to cope with the sun, but even that didn't seem enough. She missed having her parasol. 5 days they had been in town, looking for a sign that the Straw Hats had docked. Warrant Officer Briggs had once again claimed that they had made the journey from Little Garden to Nanoa in record time. It was such an oft-used phrase by the navigator that honestly it was getting to be a bit off-putting by now. At first they had feared a repeat of Little Garden, but Smoker had seemed content to stay in harbor at Nanoa after hearing of several pirate attacks that had occurred there recently. The captain might be single-minded about pursuing the Straw Hats, but if the presence of the Marines afforded the town better protection, he was happy to provide it. Nanoa could also be described as noisy, certainly a lot noisier than the other towns she had been in, namely Shelltown. Still, her technique of listening in a crowd was working a lot better with practice. It was really a means of filtering the layers of sound, and picking out key tones of what she wanted to hear. Still, it surprised her when out of the hubbub of the hundreds of conversations, the phrase, "Monkey D. Luffy," came leaping out. The voice that uttered it was unctuous, but puzzled, as if someone had asked him a question he couldn't answer. Another voice, that of the questioner, floated into her hearing. "There is a chance he might be in this town. I've been looking for him for a while now." This second voice sounded younger but still quite mature. It was politely spoken with an easygoing kind of confidence. The first voice was answering in the negative, suggesting that the querier try a local eatery for more information. She could barely take in all of it. Her heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear it and the conversation and nothing else. Someone else was after Straw Hat? Was he a potential ally or rival? It didn't really matter at this stage, but if the man had been searching for that dastardly pirate, it would be of advantage to her to find out how far along in his search he'd gotten. At the very least, finding Straw Hat would be one step closer to finding Zoro and her Wado Ichimonji. He didn't speak in the manner of a marine or local law enforcement officer. He might have been a bounty hunter, she couldn't be sure, but in any case, it was best not to parade around in her marine uniform. It tended to have the unwanted effect of shutting up people's mouths on sight. "Piers-san, sorry, but I'm going to have to borrow this." Without a further word, she snatched Piers' linen cover and disappeared into the crowd after the mysterious man. Zoro gazed after the broad-shouldered back of Pirate as he disappeared into the crowd. Behind him he could hear the others speculating about the man's identity, but he, Zoro, had known that man was a pirate at the first glance. All because of that mark on his back. That mark that no pirate hunter ever forgot. He was full. After days of starvation, Zoro was finally full, and content, if for a little while. That pirate he had turned into the marine outpost had yielded a surprisingly lucrative income for his first bounty, and with it a revelation on how he was going to be able to support himself in the future, as a bounty hunter. As he strolled out of the restaurant, the sounds of another commotion greeted him from the street. A group of Marines, led by a Marine officer, not the same ginger-haired puffy one as before though, he noted, were facing off against another group of pirates, which looked to have been produced from the same mold as the earlier batch he had defeated. "You honestly think you can lay a hand on us?" challenged the foremost pirate, baring his shirt front to reveal a mark composed of crossed bones and a white mustached, skeletal face. "Do you know what this mark means?" The Marine officer certainly did, for he took a step back. "Since when did Whitebeard expand his operations into this part of the ocean?" he demanded. Turning to his subordinates, the officer barked. "And where the hell did that captain of ours go? We need him here now." "Ah, so you know what you are in for," gloated the pirate. "Too bad. Now just run away like good little Marines and—" At this point, he had trailed off, because the Marine officer's body was turning brown and elongated and was transforming into something that resembled a six-limbed eldritch horror or a tall tree demon. Oh no. The lieutenant commander's using his devil fruit. The other Marines seemed to be freaked out by it as well. Get clear. "Well, since you are a Whitebeard pirate, I guess we can't afford to hold back, can we?" The officer tree stick thing growls. "Well, let's see what you've got, pirate." The Whitebeard pirate was visibly paling. "What in the blazes are you?" He got his response, but it was in the form of the transformed devil fruit abomination shambling over in a horrifyingly fast movement and touching the pirate in the face. The pirate dropped to his knees, screaming and clutching his face in pain. It was Zoro's first witnessing of a devil fruit in action, and while he was rarely startled, this certainly gave him a shock. "Now that's unusual. Is that a zone-type transformation or a paramecia?" The voice coming from rooftop behind him, unlike the other voices, sounded only mildly interested. The fight paused as every head turned towards the newcomer, who was clad in blue and sported twin swords on the belt slung upon his waist. The main point of interest to Zoro. There were murmurs of fear and astonishment. The Marine officer's eyes narrowed. I recognize you. You're one of the Whitebeard pirates. As in, one of the division commanders, asterisk. Right on the money. The man spoke with an easy grin, as the wind ruffled his dirty blonde hair and the bandana he wore around his neck. For your information, that S isn't a member of any division of the Whitebeard pirates. And since we can't let this fake imposter run around dragging the meaning of our mark through the mud, I've just happened to drop by to take care of them. The pirate was whimpering now. Zoro didn't think it was from the pain this time. You can take care of him, as in. After we take both of you into custody, the grotesquely transformed Marine officer replied curtly. The real Whitebeard pirate sighed. Well, it's such a bother, but we really can't have it be said that the Whitebeard pirates were taken in by Marines so easily, either. Looks like we're going to have to engage in battle. Looking back, it was an understatement. The resulting battle was a curb stomp, courtesy of the Whitebeard pirate, whom he would later discover had a bounty that made his previous catch look like spare change. The puffy ginger-headed captain who had been looking for a new sword would later find his battered devil fruit officer lying atop a defeated heap of his Marines, mixed with an odd pirate here and there. Zoro would have very much have liked to challenge the swordsman pirate to a fight there and then, but opting to fight someone just after they had just taken out an entire Marine platoon, pirate crew, and a devil fruit user seemed like rather cheap timing. So instead he watched the man walk away, memorizing every detail so that he would recognize the man should they ever cross paths again. He was never to know that he would never get the chance again, but he did learn to appreciate on that day how far a Whitebeard pirate would go for the pride of that mark. As Zoro pondered why a Whitebeard for Luffy, his eye fell on a figure that seemed familiar. It couldn't be. It was the female Marine who had accosted him back in Logatown. The same one who had looked so much like Kuina. Damn it. Whenever I run into her, bad things happen. As he ducked behind a giant urn to avoid detection, he couldn't help but notice another person behind where the Marine officer stood. His jaw fell open. It was Kuina. There was no doubt about it. She wasn't aware of his presence just yet, for which he was profoundly grateful, as he could see very clearly now that she was wearing a Marine uniform. The very thought of Kuina as a Marine disturbed him, because he knew she wasn't the type to care about justice and world order, so it was rather obvious what was the one and only reason she could have possibly joined them for. Even as he watched, he saw her grab something from another marine near her and hurry after someone in the crowd. His brow furrowed with worry. She'd gone in the same direction as the white-beard pirate. Damn it, don't get involved with him, Kuina, he thought inwardly, despite knowing Kuina couldn't have possibly heard him. You don't know what you're in for. Smoker grumbled to himself as he watched Toshigi scurrying to get the pirates handed over to the local guards. The royal guards must have been too hard-pressed to keep the rumbling rebellion in check to spare any attention for the pirates. That had to be the explanation for it. There was simply no other way such unskilled pirates could have been allowed to roam free otherwise. Piers, looking a bit lost, was helping Toshigi with the pirates, absent-mindedly apologizing as he punched one who tried to escape in the face with his shiny new knuckle duster gloves. The girl who was always with him, Kuina, was nowhere to be seen. Idly, Smoker wondered where she had gone, then shrugged and went about his business. Despite her handicap, the girl was quite capable of looking after herself, and if his evaluation of her was correct, she was currently the third most powerful fighter aboard his ship. Her background check had proved most interesting. Daughter of a deceptively unassuming dojo master in an East Blue village. The wife of the dojo master had been from a well-known and honored family. And as was expected of such a clan, they had connections with certain people in high places. And then there was the other interesting discovery. The girl had been apprenticed to a blind kimono maker around whom certain rumors swirled. Smoker was no fool. He'd heard stories about that village. It was the kind of place famous and infamous people went to retire and live out the remainder of their lives in peaceful obscurity. Nothing particularly attention-worthy from the Marine's point of view, until you take a couple of peculiar incidents in account. There had been a case many years ago where a Marine who would later be known as Don Krieg had mutinied, turned pirate, and murdered the captain of his ship. The disaster had happened off Shimotsuki, but when the Marine reinforcements had hurried to the settlement, sure that the pirate would have ravaged the little hamlet, they had found it instead relatively unscathed save for one casualty. The villagers had explained that the pirates hadn't seemed very interested in raiding the place, and had backed off once they'd shown some stout resistance. Rumors in the port town spoke differently. They whispered that Don Krieg actually had tried to raze the village to the ground for the hell of it, but after their killing of a defenseless old man who had been fishing off the pier, a swordsman had appeared and in a rage, had decimated the pirates who had been responsible. Some rumors insisted that there had actually been two different swordsmen, but the thing that remained consistent in all the tellings was that Don Krieg's crew of over 100 men had been driven off by at most a pair of blade-wielding defenders. Coincidentally, news that Don Krieg was aggressively swelling the ranks of his crew until it numbered in the thousands came frequently after that. It had been very obvious to him that not everyone in that village were who they said they were. But it was outside of his jurisdiction, and since they lay low and kept the peace, so he was content to leave them alone. The girl, however. From Smoker's point of view, Kuina was someone worth keeping an eye on. The pirate hunter Zoro had been trained in the same dojo she was, and factor in her connection to the man. He did not intend for anyone else who could be so potentially dangerous end up as another pirate. And just as he was thinking all this, he saw a glimpse of someone familiar. He stopped and frowned. Yes, that was definitely her slipping into the entrance of that building, but what was she up to? A little bit of creative rearranging. She had been trained as a kimono maker after all, turned 2 linen cloaks into a respectable desert robe, complete with headdress. If one didn't look too closely, she could just about pass as a local. Or so Kuina hoped as she sidled into the doorway and attempted to meld into the background of people. The man who was looking for Straw Hat had taken a seat in a restaurant a passerby had kindly informed her was called the Spice Bean. The pleasant smells of delicious food wafting about spoke well for the skills of the cook, whom the mysterious man was chatting with. Like all good conversationalists, the mysterious man did not rush to the point at once. He started off by talking about the weather. It hadn't rained for years, moved on to the deliciousness of the food. Naturally this pleased the cook. And finally on to the people of the town. And then finally to the people who had visited the town. He had a way with people. And soon the proprietor of the place was talking about all and sundry as if they were the best of friends. When he started talking about looking for a pirate named Straw Hat Luffy, she told herself to keep calm and listen intently. She still had no idea what this man wanted with Straw Hat Luffy, but what he was doing was pretty much asking all the questions she would have asked herself had she thought of it. Unfortunately, fate had a way of interfering with her wants. For example, the man suddenly dropped dead. She knew he had dropped dead because of the shocked silence of all present in the room. She was good at reading silence, and the silence that came mid-sentence and the squish of face meeting plate of food was one of horror. Then one by one, voices were heard. Barely murmurs at first, then fearful exclamations and intrigued theorizing. Over the talk of desert strawberries, she couldn't help feeling a little fearful herself. The apparently healthy young man had been after Straw Hat Luffy, and suddenly he had dropped dead in the middle of asking questions about him. It was too much for coincidence. Had his food been poisoned? Was it some sort of deadly devil fruit power? Was that the mysterious Straw Hat's special ability that made people obey him? Ahoo-ha-ha-ha. With my heart attack devil fruit, I can make anyone drop dead suddenly. All I need is a name, and they are doomed. Straw Hat waved around a black notebook with spindly handwriting and gloated. Remember, crew, I have in here the names of your families and friends recorded in here. Disobey my orders, and they will die, for a god am I. His crew hung their heads and obeyed. They had no other choice. As she pondered this as a possibility, there was another squelching sound. The man had come back to life. Well, that certainly ruled it out, she thought in annoyance as the man nonchalantly went back to eating, much to the consternation of the crowd, who began to disperse in disgust. He'd just fallen asleep mid-sentence. In the middle of eating and talking, somehow. It gave her an idea on how to start a conversation with him, though. "Are you sure you're all right, sir?" she asked as she sidled up to the man at the bar. "Maybe you should see a doctor about your condition." "Oh, don't worry about it, miss. I'm used to it, it runs in the family," the M enough, before turning back to the proprietor of the restaurant again. "By the way, I'm looking for a man," he began, and she could hear the rustle of a wanted poster being laid on the counter. "Straw Hat Luffy," she said casually, pretending to glance at it. "That's a familiar name." As expected, it caught the mysterious man's attention immediately. "Oh, have you seen him around?" "I came across that name while searching for someone else," she explained, choosing to end her statement in such a way that it both avoided answering the question directly and yet did not sound rude. "The man I'm looking for is known in the East Blue as the pirate hunter Roronoa Zoro. I don't suppose you have heard any news of him?" "Can't say I have," the man replied. The expectant silence at the end of it gave her the opportunity to bait the conversation with more information. He was reputed to have joined the crew of one Straw Hat Luffy. The man was sharp, he got the point immediately. "I see our meeting here wasn't by chance." Kuina smiled enigmatically. She had to play this right. 10 minutes later, the proprietor of the Spice Bean was somewhat in a daze as he served food to the strange boy at the bar. 10 minutes ago, the strange customer intermittently fell asleep in his food had been talking to that girl, and though the restaurateur tried to be tactful and didn't attempt to eavesdrop, he couldn't help but hear the occasional word, like "brother" and "Straw Hat," in tones most earnest. All that came to an end when a large, hulking figure of a Marine appeared at the threshold of the door. He was obviously a Marine officer by his dress and menacing aura. Marines were not a common sight in Alabasta, due to the fact that the desert country operated autonomously from the world government and maintained their own law enforcement in the form of the Royal Guards. But what with all the drama with the rebellion, he supposed it was not that surprising after all that the world government would send some help in the form of Marines. And it was what this Marine had said that had sent him, and everyone in the eatery into a panic. "You have some nerve eating out in public. Commander of Whitebeard Pirates 2nd Division, Portgas d'Ace." Yes, 5 minutes ago, the Marine officer had stood framed in the doorway staring down his customer whom he had newly discovered to be the 2nd Division commander of the infamous Whitebeard Pirates. He had been most terrified. They were both in his restaurant, or soon to be if they fought. What was left of it? "Why are you here, in this part of the Grand Line?" Portgas d'Ace answered calmly. "I'm on a search for my little brother." "Girl, get away from that pirate," the Marine officer commanded. The wisps of smoke curling around his great bulk were thickening menacingly. But," began the girl who had been chatting to his customer. "You'd better do as he says, miss," the infamous Fire Fist Ace said casually. "It's for the best, things are going to get ugly soon." The girl seemed reluctant to obey and the restaurateur wondered why. If it were him, he'd run for safety right there and then. But right before she could comply, there was a high-pitched yodel of joy and something shot through the doorway at blinding speed. The girl managed to dive out of the way, narrowly avoiding the flying projectile that was the hit Marine officer. Fire Fist Ace, being seated at the bar and caught off guard, was not so lucky, and with a splintering crash of stone and wood, the Spice Bean and the houses behind it gained new exits. The newcomer, despite everyone's attempts to make him understand the gravity of the situation, seemed absolutely unaware that he had just sent an infamous pirate and a high-ranking Marine flying through the walls. In fact, he was busy stuffing his face and praising the food. "Are you out of your mind?" came the angry voice of the girl, who was gingerly rubbing her temple where it had hit a table. "What have you done?" "Huh? What happened?" "That's what I asked you," she snapped, fumbling around for her white cane. "Where have they gone?" "Where's who gone? Are you playing dumb, huh?" "It's hopeless, miss," the restaurant owner told her. "He's oblivious to what's going on. Are you all right?" "Yes." "Who is that madman anyway?" "No idea, but he had better be getting out of here before those two wake up." She continued rubbing her temple, but he got the impression it was because the newcomer had given her a headache. "This isn't just madness," she grumbled, "this is." And then she never finished her sentence as all hell broke loose. The next few moments were total chaos. The Whitebeard pirate made his appearance, for all of 2 seconds before an enraged Marine charged in and trampled over him. The girl had located her cane and had risen to her feet, just as the Marine officer bellowed in a voice that shook the building. "Straw Hat! Asterisk! Where?" The girl was now brandishing a wicked-looking blade that had previously been hidden in her cane. There was a ringing silence, broken only by the sound of high-speed eating, and then the air was graced with a fine splattering of food as the boy appeared to finally register what trouble he was in. With a speed worthy of a riding duck, the boy bolted out the door. "Kuina! He just ran past you." After him, with a whoosh of white smoke, the Marine officer was out the door. The girl, one of her cloaks askew and revealing the Marine uniform underneath, looked stunned. "Wait! What? That was him!" In a flurry of linen, she too was gone in hot pursuit. As if on cue, the Fire Fist Ace scrambled to his feet after being rudely pushed into the rubble, and was harrying after them too. The restaurant owner shook his head. It was as if it was some kind of comedy routine. That was the moment when he realized that none of them had remembered to pay. Damn that Straw Hat. He had tricked her, impersonating a madman. And she'd fallen for it. She had had the chance to stop him, and she'd muffed it. In addition, there was that other nugget of information she had just obtained. Brother. This could not possibly have gotten worse. The way Smoker had talked about the flame pirate was as though he was a very dangerous criminal. And Straw Hat Luffy was his brother? Ahead she could hear Smoker call out to Tashigi to stop Straw Hat, but the man seemed to have some sort of bizarre ability and speed. He had somehow eluded her superior officer and gotten to the top of the buildings and was escaping that way. He couldn't quite elude Captain Smoker though, and who, thanks to the power of his devil fruit, was furiously following in his wake. She was determined not to lose them. There was a high possibility that, like the coward he was, Straw Hat would be running towards the safety of his crew. Which meant Zoro and her Wado would be there too. Her senses were extended as he led them in a wild chase around the town. Vaguely she was aware of running past Tashigi and the other Marines from the ship, but she soon left them behind in the maze of buildings. She could still sense Smoker-san engaging in his pursuit, and she took care to keep him on her left, and not crash into anything in her way. But he had too much of a head start. She'd lost him in the streets ahead. She gritted her teeth. No, she wasn't beaten yet. She had just one more trump card left to play. Find the gray-watered silk. What? The trainings were getting more and more ludicrous. Instead of identifying the cloth that Ichi-san held now, Ichi-san was moving on to making her locate a specific bolt of cloth out of the hundreds in the drying yard just by the sound. The previous training had honed Kuina's senses enough that 9 times out of 10 she could correctly identify the fabric just by the sound. But sensing its location amidst many others, that was taking it to an entirely new level. Ichi-san, this is impossible, the girl said, exasperated after an hour of attempting it. There's just too much noise, too much interference. Well, I guess it's IMGIRL to be the world's greatest swordsman, Then, Ichi-san replied blithely, heading indoors. Kuina gritted her teeth. She wasn't going to lose. Hours later, dinner time had come and gone, but there was still no sign of Kuina. She should be all right, Ichi said calmly on the worried queries of the maidservant. Just leave the door unlocked for her. No need. Both women looked up. At the doorway, looking tired and exhausted, was her protégé. In her arms was a bolt of silk the color of a stormy sky. The blind kimono maker smiled. Come in and eat, we've saved dinner for you. As the starving girl began eating hungrily, Ichi-san sipped her tea. How did you find it? It took a while, but I listened for the right sound, and ignored the others. Good. Tomorrow, I expect you to find it faster. It was only logical to assume that Straw Hat Luffy wore a straw hat. She'd never really tried applying that particular skill this way before, but now was a time to try, if anything. Dried straws, interwoven, rustling against each other in a locked pattern. Off in the distance, far beyond the hearing range of a normal person, she heard it. She knew which way to go. She took a step forward, then hesitated as another thought occurred to her. She could use the same method to listen for Zoro and go after him instead. But what would have been the use of that? Zoro, for reasons still left unknown, wouldn't return with her. Whatever hold Straw Hat had over him, it transcended mere physical proximity. If she ever were to free Zoro, it would have to be by confronting the Straw Hat himself. Perhaps she had been chasing the wrong person all this time. Straw Hat was every bit as cunning as she'd suspected, for at one point he'd flitted in between two buildings and was abruptly running in the opposite direction. By then she had memorized his presence, and she was sure he was going to try and run round the building and towards her because she knew Tashigi and the other Marines were coming from the other direction. Trusting her senses, she ducked through an alleyway to cut him off. Then ahead of her could hear someone else call out, "There are the Straw Hat Pirates, don't let them get away." Her heart was hammering wildly now. Zoro was there, Zoro was there. Straw Hat was running faster in anticipation of the Marines. He was even outpacing them. Kuina leapt out from her hiding place, Koyajaku in her hand ready to strike him down. And then suddenly, Koyajaku's rippling blade was blocked by the familiar length of her very own Wado Ichimonji. He really should have just been focused in running away, but as he turned back to see if the Marines were gaining, he saw, in slow motion, the familiar fluid movement and the flashing blade descending upon his oblivious leader. Without thinking, Zoro ran back. Just in time. Kuina's attack on Luffy would have had a very high chance of bisecting their rubber captain if he hadn't been blocking it otherwise. There was a split second of stillness as both opponents recognized each other. "Kuina, I can't believe you followed me into the Grand Line," the swordsman said calmly to his rival, whose face was equally stony and controlled. "And why are you dressed as a Marine?" "Guess," she replied curtly, starting a new attack. "You're trying to go after Luffy now, aren't you?" he countered between dodging strikes. "As you have rightly observed, Zoro, first I'm a Marine now." He noted she was gritting her teeth in annoyance, an old habit of hers. "That means I go after pirates, especially dangerous ones like your crew and that captain of yours." "Zoro?" Nami's high-pitched screech carried from a distance. "We can't stop to fight, there's too many Marines." As annoying as that sea witch was, she was right and fighting was probably not the best thing to be doing right now. But he had no choice. Any other Marine, he could have probably turned his back on, but Kuina was on a whole different level. That exasperating woman probably wouldn't think twice about cutting down the rest of the crew. No, with Kuina, you fought with all you had and didn't hold back, that was the agreement. "I'm not holding back," he warned her as all three swords were drawn. "You never do," she replied, calmly. Beneath the cool light of the moon, the two children were fighting a duel not befitting someone of their tender ages. This was not practice, they were wielding real swords this time. For Kuina, there was no need to hold back, for Zoro had challenged her in the first place. She dispatched her opponent with a deadly concentration and focus, fueled inwardly also by a tranquil kind of rage. If Roronoa Zoro didn't exist, all her problems would have been over. In her ears she could still hear the echoes of her father's words, hurtful and hopeless to fight against. She did not want to believe it. The dojo was hers by rights. It should have been hers, since she'd been old enough to hold a shinai. She'd done everything in her power to live up to expectations of one expected to inherit the honor of her father and generations past. She'd trained. She'd studied theory and observed with her two eyes the sword-fighting ways of the adults, analyzed and refined them. Her mother, up to that dark day when she'd been lost to them, had believed her to be strong enough. She'd been the best. She'd never lost a match on coming to her own. And yet, it was all for nothing. It still hadn't been enough. Just because she had been born a girl, her father was now planning to hand over the dojo to some bratty little green-haired greenhorn because he didn't believe she could keep up with him when she grew up. The resentment festered and solidified into hatred. The rage flowed into her hands, and she attacked without mercy. This was a real fight and neither of them gave an inch. In the heat of battle, her senses were amplified in the natural response to stay alive. She could hear every swing of the blade, every little movement of Zoro's body as he shifted his balance, his stance, his grip. She could hear the pounding of feet as the Marines, fronted by Tashigi, closed in on them. She could hear the pirates talking amongst themselves. A girl was yelling at someone else to do something, another was yelling something about not fighting a lady, and another was telling them not to interfere and was promptly told that this wasn't the time for it. It certainly wasn't. As they fought, the Marines were closing in on them. Everyone fall back. The straw hat is mine. She could hear Captain Smoker yelling as he outpaced the straggling Marines. Zoro could too, and she knew that even in his dense head he knew the arrival of the devil fruit user meant the end of the fight for the Straw Hats. She also knew this because it had distracted him. Just for the tiniest of moments, he made a mistake and left himself open. No swordsman worth their mettle would have missed this window of opportunity. She took it. As she held Wadu's keen blade over her defeated rival, she couldn't help but realize that the only obstacle to her inheritance was one sword thrust away. And they were fighting for real. No one could really fault her for, accidentally, inflicting a fatal blow. All she had to do was bring it down, and there would be no more Zoro to tempt her father into passing her over for. Time slowed down. The progress of her sword slowed to a crawl. All she had to do was it, and it would be all over. The scenario on the streets of Nanoa would have been best described as frozen. The Marines were frozen to the spot, in astonishment at their lowly peer and what she had accomplished. The pirates were frozen to the spot, in disbelief at what had happened to their ultimate swordsman. Kuina was frozen to the spot, her breath frozen in disbelief at what she herself had done. And looking back at her in equal disbelief, his face a picture of shock and betrayal, was Roronoa Zoro, the pirate hunter who at one time had been known as the greatest swordsman in the East Blue. All she had to do was it, and it would be all over. Defeat and terror in his face that had struck her then. It is dishonorable for a swordsman to continue fighting against an opponent who has already been beaten, a voice, very like her mother's, said in her head. She looked down at the face that had always looked up to her in both envy and admiration. She hesitated. The blade wavered. At the last moment she diverted the blow and sank the katana into the grass beside his head. What? Zoro was enraged. The hell do you think you're playing at, Kuina? Admittedly it was a moment of carelessness, and he had paid for it fair and square. In a rather eerie replay of Logatown, but juxtaposed, he was backed up against the wall, and Kuina's sword was embedded in it, a scant inch away from his face. His childhood friend looked equally surprised at herself, for she had diverted the killing blow at the very last moment. I didn't mean to. Around them, the onlookers were somewhat at a loss why Kuina, who should have the upper hand, seemed mortified. I don't know what came over me. She pulled her sword back out of the wall. But the fight seemed to have gone out of her. We promised. He growled angrily. No holding back on each other. If you had a chance to take me down, you should have just done it then. I know, Kuina snapped back. I meant to kill you. My hand just acted on its own. What kind of lame excuse is that? Zoro, stupid Marimo head. Zoro? Hang on. The pirate crew seemed to have found their voices. She knew from the volume that they were racing back to help their swordsman. Great. You're embarrassing me now, groaned Zoro. Shouldn't you be worrying about the fact that your entire crew is going to be captured? She retorted. As if on cue, the billowing voice of Captain Smoker bellowed out. White blow. They could hear the whooshing contrail of smoke from Captain Smoker's attack. He wasn't messing around and going straight for Straw Hat Luffy. And just at that moment, another voice joined the fray. Cager OU. There was a sudden premonition of doom. And the next moment, the world dissolved into a blossom of fire. She could feel the burn scar on her face prickling, and the horrifyingly familiar sensation of the burning heat. It all happened for the want of a nail. That step had always been loose. She'd tripped and fallen from it a dozen times. But this was the first time it had such a deadly impact. Instinctively, as she went hurtling down the stairs, she had her good hand flung forward to break her fall, letting go of her katana as she did so. In another lifetime, the fall might have killed her. But in this one, she was pretty sure it had been limited to some broken bones at most. It was a relief she hadn't broken something important like her neck, but even as the pain stabbed through her there was the realization that the oil lamp in her hand was missing. No, it wasn't missing. Time was slowing down. It had crashed into the floor, splattering oil everywhere and even onto her face. The portion of the wick that was lighted had bounced off the floor, and was once again settling into the pool of inflammable liquid. This time it caught fire, and the wicked orange tongues were leaping towards her. She had to get away, but the broken bones meant that her body wouldn't obey her fast enough. And then the fire was everywhere, and the horrible smell of her own burning flesh was secondary only to the shrill scream that she could barely recognize as her own. The ribbons of flame were rippling around the figure of the newcomer. He stood between them and the terrifying smoke marine captain from Logatown. Every straw hat had stopped to watch in astonishment. All except one, who was picking himself up after diving to the ground and flinging himself over the female marine swordsman. Since then was that Marimo head such a gentleman? Sanji wondered, happily diverting his attention from looking at the back of a shirtless guy to the girl sprawled out on the sand. Baka, what are you doing just standing there? Zoro was yelling angrily at the girl. Are you trying to get yourself killed? Sanji always had a roving eye for women, and this was the first time he'd had a chance at a proper look. This one was a bit of a petanko, but nice figure otherwise, a rather cute demure look that was a shade of shell-shocked at the moment. He hoped that that dark patch over her face was just simply dirt. Actually, now that he thought about it, he had the nagging feeling he'd seen her somewhere before. My face isn't on fire, the girl was muttering to herself. Couldn't you at least dive out of the way? The swordsman was still furious. It's not on fire, are you listening to me? Not on fire. The voice was shaky, rapid and desperately trying to regain some semblance of self-control. Oi! The angry tone had changed to one of worry. Are you okay? Sanji nearly swallowed his cigarette in shock. That idiot swordsman was expressing concern. For a girl? The girl finally seemed to have broken out of the state of shock she had been in. Zoro-kun? You. Sanji pinched himself. Hard. Ow. Nope, he was definitely seeing this. Either that or he had died and was in hell. If that was true, the girl and Zoro were next going to profess their undying love for each other and sail off into the sunset to live happily ever after. I have no idea what you're talking about, Marimo said coolly. And lo, the world shifted back into sanity for Sanji. The swordsman seemed to have reverted into his normal, boorish self. Standing up fully, the swordsman turned away from the stunned girl to look at the flaming newcomer, who was calmly facing the smoke guy off as though the latter was not an insanely powerful devil fruit user. So that guy has a devil fruit ability too, said Zoro. Who the hell is this guy and why is he helping us? It was a good question. We can't talk like this. You guys run for it, I'll keep these guys busy. The terrifying flaming pirate was between her and the others. Even if she could find where she had dropped Koyajaku, she doubted she'd be able to take him on. If only her legs would stop trembling. I am not afraid of the fire, she told herself firmly. Lies. Blatant lies. Let's go. The voice was high-pitched and shrill. But it carried a ring of authority in it. It had to be the voice of Straw Hat Luffy. Damn coward, running away. She had to get up and confront that scoundrel before he escaped. She hadn't come all this way to lose Zoro again. Zoro had shielded her from the fire. In that instant, all the anger and betrayal she had been feeling towards him crumbled away, because now she knew that somewhere inside, he was still himself and he still cared. Even recovering Wado took second seat to that. Yet he had to pretend to not to be concerned, which meant he couldn't act like himself in front of that monster of a captain. Just what hold did that straw hat have over him? Please forgive that Marimo's boorish manners, Miss Lovely Marine, sang out another of the pirates as he fled. Maybe next time we'll. Oi, oi, that was definitely Zoro's voice. Don't go flirting with her, you damn arrow cook. What did you say, you stupid swordsman? She's off limits. Who asked you? Their bickering voices were fading away into the distance. Get up and go after them, but her stupid legs wouldn't move. You may be smoke, came the familiar voice of the mystery man from the restaurant, but I am fire. With the nature of our powers, a fight between us would be pointless. Smoker did not seem impressed, however. They were going to fight. Move, Portgas d'Ace. Perhaps the fear of being caught in another firestorm was what that finally gave her control over her feet. She got up, and half ran, half staggered after the retreating Straw Hat pirates. Behind her, she could feel the heat wave of the firewall buffet her. Keep running. Keep running. The sounds of different streets and people whistled by. They varied from the start LT-led inhabitants, to what sounded, oddly enough, like a quacking duck. She ran as hard as she could, but she had wasted too much time earlier. By the time she reached the docks, the pirates were already on board their ship and sailing away swiftly. The thought crossed her mind to do a Mahawk maneuver and cripple their ship, but she'd left her sword somewhere back where Smoker was presumably still fighting Fire Fist Ace. She gritted her teeth in frustration. This was beginning to get tedious, but she'd let him get away again. The three loiterers were cautiously circling the marine ship, trying to gauge if anyone was home. It seemed rather quiet, if not for the forlorn mutterings of the lone prisoner tied to the mast. It seemed as though the coast was clear, and the leader of the three, an ambitious young chap named Mr. Mello, was about to set foot on board when the board he was standing on suddenly gained a bullet hole. This was also accompanied by a bang, but the main concern that Mr. Mello had at the moment was that the hole on the board was placed precisely in the empty space between his two boots. Oh, pardon me. A thin, tall and somewhat sour-looking marine seemed to have appeared from nowhere. Mr. Mello blinked. He had been sure there had been no one in sight just a moment ago. I seem to have accidentally discharged my gun, accidentally. The three gawkers stared at him in surprise. I mean, what are the chances of my accidental stray shot happening to just miss hitting anyone? Accidentally? Lucky. Oh, so lucky. Mr. Mello began, carefully noting the said marine's attire. It was an officer's uniform, perched upon the man's sparse, stick-like frame. I mean, it's not as though you lot were. The marine pressed on, none too convincingly. Loitering around with some unsavory purpose in mind. I mean, my accidental misfire couldn't possibly have had the intention of being aimed at you, right? At this point, Mr. Mello took a step back, as in, you know, a warning shot, the marine officer added, as if his meaning wasn't quite clear enough yet. Laws. A short, balding old man appeared from behind the first marine with a revolver in hand. I hope I never have to hear you give a speech, Briggs. You'd never get to the point. Doctor, not in front of the, hey you damn kids, hollered the doctor, oblivious to the protests of the interrupted officer. Get off my gangplank. At this point, Mr. Mello and gang decided that they had had enough, and scampered off. Just as well, as at the moment, another one of their cohorts had come running up with the exciting news that Fire Fist Ace had been seen in town, and that certainly merited more attention given the Whitebeard pirate's enormous bounty. With that prospect, Mr. Mello was content to leave the marine ship alone for time being. But it was not long before the news was passed around the ranks of the Baroque Works billions to watch out for a twin-masted marine brig, and if possible, eliminate the prisoner it carried on board. In short, the damage had been done. I don't know what you thought you were doing, running after a 30 million belly pirate without a weapon, scolded Toshigi disapprovingly. Kuina stood before both her superior officers, having returned only to have to report her failure. It wouldn't have done any good anyway, Smoker interjected. Not with someone like that Portgas on their side. Swords are of no use against a logia type like him. Speaking of which, what were you doing in the restaurant Portgas was at? Kuina tried to stay calm. I heard him mention Straw Hat Luffy's name, sir. I followed him to make sure that I'd heard it right. I had no idea he was that notorious a pirate, sir. I see. Captain Smoker sat upon an upturned section of collapsed wall, calmly smoking his pair of cigars. Behind him burned the wall of fire, which the Marines were busily trying to put out. And sadly, you would not have been able to see the insignia on his back because of your condition. Kuina nodded and stayed tactfully silent while Smoker went on to talk about the presence of a Princess Vivi with the straw hats. The more she heard, the more it alarmed her. A princess of the Desert Kingdom, running alongside a wanted criminal willingly and apparently of her own free will. It sounded suspiciously similar to what had happened to Zoro. The more she thought about it, the more she was convinced there was something about Straw Hat that was deceptively dangerous. That man had some sort of bizarre ability which allowed him to impose his will on others. She remained in troubled silence as Smoker began talking about how Straw Hat was apparently targeting the Shisabukai of the same country, one Sir Crocodile whose headquarters lay somewhere called Rain Base. It would be where they would be headed next. Inwardly, Kuina made a note to ask Piers for more information about Rain Base the first chance she got. "I'm heading back to the ship. I want to talk to Briggs about our next move." "Yes, sir." Tashigi saluted as Smoker's broad back disappeared into the distance. Kuina made a move to follow, but was arrested by the other woman's voice. "Kuina." "Yes, Tashigi-san. Captain Smoker wasn't there to see it then, but I saw. You could have taken down Roronoa Zoro back there." Tashigi's voice was accusing. "You held back. Why?" "I fully intended to." Kuina replied slowly. Didn't you both train at the same dojo?" It was a subconscious reaction. "A mistake. I will not repeat it again." There was a disapproving silence. Given your previous actions, Tashigi's voice sounded as though she were struggling with herself. "I would expect to hear an excuse like that coming from someone like Piers, but not from you. Can you handle Roronoa Zoro or not?" She was weak. A sentimental girl who would never become the world's greatest swordsman because she was too soft on a childhood friend. Her temper, long kept under careful control, had frayed in the period she had been away from the kimono maker's house, and now gave way easily. "I'm sorry I did not perform to Tashigi-san's expectations," Kuina retorted. The words were respectful, but her tone was not. "I shall let Tashigi engage Zoro the next time. I am sure she would be able to take him out." The insult was subtle, but Tashigi got the point. Maybe that's why it put her out of the mood to give the girl a proper dressing down, and she stalked off angrily towards the ship. The moment the other swordswoman was out of hearing, Kuina groaned and sat down dejectedly. "Baka baka baka," she muttered to herself. It had felt good at that moment, but it was stupid of her to have done that. The bravado was one thing, but the knowledge that she had just made an enemy out of her superior officer and roommate had sunk in. It was going to be ugly down the line when she had time to think things over. "Miss Kuina." There was really no need to guess who it was. "There you are. I've been looking all over for you." "Well, I've been looking all over for it, and boy did I have to search through a lot of junk because that Fire Fist ace sure made a mess of things, what with him fighting Captain Smoker and being a devil fruit user, but all I guess it was to be expected with an epic clash like that. Anyway, where'd you go after the whole fight anyway? I was really worried, especially when you went running off without your sword." Koyajaku. If Kuina was given to swearing, she would have burst into a tirade of those then. For a moment she'd nearly forgotten she'd dropped her sword somewhere back at the fight scene. Inwardly, Kuina prayed that Ichi-san never found out that she had dropped her precious heirloom sword in the streets of some desert port town and had gone running in the opposite direction. Because, if the blind kimono maker ever did hear of it, she, Kuina, would be dead. "Yeah, about that," Piers said as he proffered something wrapped in her abandoned desert cloak. "Here it is. I found it and thought you'd probably like to have it back." He didn't get any further because Kuina, overjoyed, herself at him in a grateful hug. "Thank you, Piers-san. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Air." Wow. She didn't notice that Piers' ears were a brilliant shade of vermilion. "It's no big deal. I mean, you are too good to me. Thank you. It's nothing, Miss Kuina." Piers sounded rather surprised. "Not for someone who saved my life, remember?" "Saved my life." At the moment, something clicked. "Officer Piers." The voice of one of the other Marines interrupted the moment. "Get to the ship, will you? Captain wants to talk to you about something." "Right. I have to go, Miss Kuina." Piers began to scuttle off, anxious not to keep Captain Smoker waiting. On impulse, Kuina spoke. "Piers-san?" He paused and turned back. "Yes, Miss Kuina?" You know what Piers-san said some time ago. That Piers-san had a block when fighting with real weapons, and even though he knew he shouldn't, he still held back because he was scared of killing someone. Oh yeah. That. I owe Piers-san an apology, she explained. Back when you said that I had thought that was rather silly, but as it turns out, I'm not any better. Piers gave her a quizzical look, which translated into a quizzical silence. But you managed. Miss Thursday. I know. I thought I was immune. That it'd all be just easy. Like it. But it's not, she trailed off. No, it's not. Piers sounded rather uneasy now, as if he wasn't quite used to this facet of her and how to react. For a moment, her mask had slipped. And just as quickly, she recovered as understanding flooded in. Don't mind me, Piers-san, she attempted to say with a smile. Go. You should head off to find Smoker-san now. I'll be fine. After he had left, she sighed and stopped sensing her surroundings for a moment, letting the blankness that came in its place encompass her. And from this void, the answer came ringing clear. Perhaps she had known it all along but just never bothered to put it into coherent thought. But she accepted it, and it gave her the strength to carry on. She would never be able to fight Zoro the same way they used to. She understood this now. Not until she had saved him from Straw Hat Luffy. Not until the favor was returned. Because she was in his debt, because he was the one who had saved her. She sat alone in the darkness, because it made no difference to her. Someone who was now doomed to spend the rest of their life seeing nothing. Despite herself, she wept. It was over. She had lost. Without losing a match even, she had still lost. She had vowed to become the greatest swordsman in the world. Just like she had said in the heat of the moment, just to show her father. She had made a promise to Zoro even. But the silence just laughed at her as cruel reality sank in. How could one crippled East Blue Village girl ever hope to accomplish some grand dream like that? In answer, came the strident call, Kuina. She grimaced. The little upstart was there again, banging at the door. She knew his stubborn little face would be fixed in a picture of determination. Zoro, go away. She tried to ignore the pounding on the door and his plaintive cry. Kuina, come out and fight me. We promised. You can't just run away from it by falling the stairs. An angry exchange of words followed. She wondered if he were mocking her. No one could have possibly understood how she felt. It was so easy for him to just say things. What would you know, Baka Zoro? Why don't you try fighting blind? His answer was a surprise. Very well, I accept your challenge. I'll cut my eyes out and... You will do no such thing. He would go that far. Fine. From now on I'm going to fight every duel blindfolded. Until you come out of there and fight me. He really meant it. Her tears dried as a reassuring certainty settled in her heart. At the very least, there would always be one person who would always have this unwavering belief in her. And as long as he did, so would she.